A new survey conducted by the Harris Poll on behalf of NerdWallet finds that Canadian parents are expected to spend an average of $524 for back-to-school shopping. The findings are a shock to many, but unfortunately not a shock for those who are starting back-to-school preparations for their kids. And while high inflation certainly plays a role here, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered on why the expected cost is so high. Well, joining us now is Ms. Shannon Terrell, spokesperson and personal finance expert for NerdWallet Canada. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for your time, ma'am. Now, for many who are not parents, the amount of $524 seems like quite a lot of money right there. So were you surprised by the results of the survey?
To be honest, I was a little taken aback by these results. So, spending more than $500 in back to school shopping is a sizable sum of money. Though I do understand how parents might get there, especially if they're buying for more than one child. That said, it is a substantial cost, but there are ways to do this type of shopping on a budget and save some money.
So what are some of the bigger items that are driving this total cost up?
Well, I do think that it varies by age and by grade. But that said, I think that parents are having to account for clothing, perhaps even a school uniform, shoes, books, classroom supplies, and potentially even electronics. And from that list, I do think the heavy hitters this year are going to be electronics and clothing.
All right, ma'am. Now, how has inflation impacted the decisions that parents are making when doing their back to school shopping?
So, our study found that 27% of parents say that inflation is impacting their spending habits this year. And in fact, they're planning to potentially purchase fewer supplies this year as a result. Now, inflation remains high, though I'll say we're in a better place right now at this time this year than we were at last year. So in July, our prices rose again by 3.3%. And of course, we've been dealing with these elevated prices for quite some time. So we have to keep in mind this is going to have a cumulative effect on the budgets for parents that are looking at the new school year shopping.
And in terms of shopping trends, have you seen parents maybe go for sales a little bit more, maybe thrift shop?
Absolutely. So we found that over half of Canadian parents do intend to shop during sales to try and make the most of their budget this year. And speaking of which, for those who are looking for those sales, if parents can stand to hold off on conducting their back to school shopping until just after the school year starts, that's when they're going to be able to potentially take advantage of some of those clearance sales. So, something to keep an eye on.
Definitely some helpful advice there, ma'am. Now, another thing to consider here is that over $500 parents are spending just at the beginning of the school year. So how much are they expected to spend throughout the rest of the year?
So, our study did not explore continued expenses over the course of the year. So, it's difficult to speak to that. But ultimately, I think this is going to just vary from family to family quite a bit. There are numerous factors at play here, including how many children you have, and of course, the level of education they're entering.
And how likely are some Canadian families falling into debt because of these back to school costs?
Yes, so we found that 14% of parents do anticipate going into debt this year to cover those back to school expenses, either through credit cards or through potentially a paycheck advance. So, one caveat here that I do have is while we want to avoid going into debt if possible, in some circumstances, it's just not feasible. But I would urge folks to consider the difference between putting a charge on your credit card and taking out a payday loan. Payday loans tend to have prohibitively high interest rates. They can be predatory and they can be designed to keep you in that cycle of debt. So definitely exercise some caution before you consider one.
All right, Ms. Terrell, just a quick 30 seconds left here, but if you could leave our viewers with one message in regards to back to school shopping, what would it be?
Ultimately, make a list. This is going to help you avoid those impulse purchases and it's going to help you with decision fatigue.
All right, Ms. Terrell, thank you again for your time today.
Thank you for having me.